Well, hello. I thought we'd talk a little bit about glazing today. Glazing is simply a really delicate technique of adding a lot of very thin layers instead of one very thick layer. And in the simplest terms, if you're mixing your paint with your oil, it has a lot more oil in it than it has paint. Or if you like to use a glazing medium, I prefer liquid, which is sort of a thick gel. It dries really fast and lends itself very nicely to glaze painting. So I thought I would just kind of show you a little bit of what I'm talking about here. I'm working on this kind of swampy painting, and I want everything to be very subtle. So instead of putting a whole lot of paint on, I'm going to use a little bit of that liquid and just a tiny bit of paint. And then we'll apply just a very subtle little addition of paint. And you can see, usually you need to let your layers completely dry before you start trying to glaze, or it'll pick up the layers underneath them. So see how gentle and subtle and delicate that can be? And then you just keep adding. You can add lights, you can add darks, whatever you need to be doing. Reds, blues, doesn't matter. As long as you want to apply very thin layers and just build on top of those layers, you can get some really neat effects. They're very subtle. It's a technique that the Dutch invented back in the 17th century. You see it sometimes in portraiture, and as this oil builds up, you get these sort of translucent layers, and it really captures the light nicely. Once you hang it, it kind of captures the light and refracts it around and gives a really neat sort of effect. So there's a few of the lights. Now I'm going to glaze in some darks so that you can see the opposite effect. And if you don't have the liquid for this, again, you can just use oil paint itself. Just thin it down with a lot of oil, and you may have to play with it a bit to see what that consistency is you like. Sometimes it's got more paint than oil. Sometimes it's got more thinner, either the liquid or the oil than paint. So just kind of play with that and see how that works. Now this is a little more time consuming, but like I said, you get some nice subtle effects instead of just slopping that paint all on there and just working with it afterwards, which is another valid technique. This one's just a little more delicate, so you can see how that would come together. This usually works out nice too if it's a lot drier. You seem to be able to get a little bit more control, and you can, what I like to do sometimes is just lay the paint on it, and it's a very thin paint, and then blend it in after it's on there. Something along those lines. Yeah, that tends to be my process, is to lay the paint on and then blend it afterwards instead of just trying to blend all at once. All right, so there you go. Hopefully that is some helpful insight into glazing.